So thank you for coming. As you know, as we started, this conference will bring on spyware, very short word, which is a very good example of how a software could penetrate into our lives. So spyware can affect quite a lot of rights, as you know, and our panel will inform us more extensively. So fundamental freedoms like the freedom of expression, because spyware attacks on the part of civil society like us who try to work for the truth and work for rights. The spyware can affect fundamental rights like privacy. Spyware can also affect by profiling all the people who want to intervene in the civil process of contributing to our society, to the best of our society. And it's quite interesting that such software can be turned against the civil society. The colleagues will speak more in detail. It's also quite interesting that in Europe, it's significant rather than interesting that we're talking of this in Europe, because in Europe we have the highest level of protection of rights. We have a Charter of Fundamental Rights, which protects Article 7 and 8, the right to privacy, that protects the right to personal data. We have a regulation that protects personal data. We have since last year also a regulation on artificial intelligence that targets in particular those forms of artificial intelligence that represent a threat for fundamental rights. So spyware is a problem of all of us, is a problem that is widely dealt now, widely spoken now in the European Union, because our purpose should be to protect our civil society and our fundamental freedoms from these forms of attack on these, as well as keep governments and companies, as well for the providers of spyware, accountable before us. So it's just very general as an introduction, and I will leave my much more competent colleagues to speak and delight us. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so our subject today is Pegasus spyware, which is of particular importance for us in Luxembourg, because just across the road opposite Auchan, we have Q Cyber Technology, which is one of the 20 entities that represent NSO Group that produce Pegasus spyware. And today we're going to be talking about the latest generation of Pegasus spyware. So this spyware has developed. So the latest version, so it's an invisible, powerful cyber weapon, and it can infiltrate a device without us clicking on a link. So your phone, you don't need to click anything, and your phone can be turned into a surveillance tool. They can extract your messages, they can track your calls, they can activate your camera and your microphone. They can access even encrypted messages on your phone. So and we're going to hear how this has been used in the EU and worldwide against journalists, activists, and political opponents. So it's now 4 years since Amnesty International, together with Citizen Lab Canada, exposed the scale of the Pegasus hacking scandal and the abuses. And it's 2 years since the European Parliament accepted the recommendations of a 1-year inquiry into Pegasus and proposed the reforms that are necessary to curb these abuses, because democracy was at stake. So where are we now? So today we're going to look at the situation today. And we're very lucky to have experts who've done groundbreaking research to expose the misuse of spyware from Amnesty forensic work, and who've led the inquiries for the European Parliament and who are fighting within the legal system to get justice for victims. So on behalf of Amnesty and Committee Pegasus of Proche-Orient, who we work in solidarity for Palestine and Palestinian rights, we welcome you to this conference, and we hope it will be a call for action, particularly action from the Luxembourg government, so that we can work together so the technology serves us instead of surveying us. Okay, so we will have 10 minutes presentation from each of the speakers, and then we will have a panel discussion where we have 3 questions to ask the panelists, and then we will open up to your questions. So we're going to start with Jurre van Bergen from Amnesty Security Lab. He has worked together, Amnesty Tech, they work with Citizen Lab in Canada, and they've exposed the scale of this surveillance scandal. So they analyze, they do forensic analysis, and then they produce the reports, and then they advocate for rights. And his research follows ongoing abuses. So in 2021, we had Jean Asselborn in Luxembourg saying Luxembourg will not tolerate any human rights violations via spyware. But Mr. Van Bergen has been working on cases in Serbia, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and he's also contributed to research on Israel's influence in lawsuits against NSO Group. So he will present to us a research angle. Can we welcome, please, Jurre van Bergen?
So I have a little presentation. So at the Amnesty Security Lab last year, we published a research report into surveillance exports from various spyware manufacturers to Indonesia. And not only spyware, as well as surveillance technology. And so our report was called A Web of Surveillance. And the Amnesty Security Lab is a multidisciplinary team of researchers, hackers, coders, campaigners, and advocates. We work to protect civil society from unlawful digital surveillance, spyware, and other human rights abuses enabled by technology. Some of our notable research publications have been the Pegasus projects, the Predator files, and some research into Novi Spy just recently in Serbia. Our goal is simple: to raise the cost of digital authoritarianism by identifying abuses, exposing the perpetrators reputationally and legally. And so spyware is a malicious software which enables a spyware operator to gain coded access to information from a target computer system or device. And then we'd like to call some specific spyware to be highly invasive, as the functionality of that highly invasive spyware cannot be limited. And so the scale of the spyware threat, as we have started to document it ever since the release of the Pegasus project in 2021, we have been able to confirm the targeting of journalists in at least 19 countries. But this number tends to grow every single year.
So we only see the tip of the iceberg. The scale of abuse is much higher. Last year, Apple alerts users in 92 countries to mercenary spyware attacks. Apple sent out leak notifications of spyware attacks last week. This number has now grown to 117. In total, they have notified users of spyware attacks in over 150 countries total. These spyware systems are sold for millions of euros. Each successful attack may cost the customer 10 to 20,000 euro depending on who they sell to and who the customer is. In this case, this came from a quote from another spyware manufacturer called Intellexa, who is also active out of Europe. And so the report that we worked on, Web Surveillance, documented this kind of sales of spyware and surveillance technology from a variety of actors. One of them here in Luxembourg, Q Cyber Technologies, which is a subsidiary of NSO Group based in Israel, as well as several others that are active in Switzerland, Greece, and Israel. And they end up in Indonesia through brokers active in Singapore. We did this together as a collaborative investigation between AMSI International and key media partners. Tempo in Indonesia, Haaretz in Israel, Veld Research Group and WAS based out of Switzerland, and Inside Story in Greece. So we found several spyware and surveillance technology that were active. Q Cyber Technology was able to export non-dual use items. So this means that they are hardware systems for which they require to operate the Pegasus or the Circles technology from. And maybe just to explain a little bit more the difference, because NSO Group or Q Cyber Technologies has several products. One is Pegasus, this is the spyware system. The other one is a subsidiary active from Bulgaria and Cyprus called Circles. They now operate it as, I think, NSO landmark as a product. But what Circles is able to do is that it's a dual localization and interception platform. So given that the operator of this technology has your number, is able to put this in the system for which it can then subsequently locate you in a country, or it's able to intercept all your phone calls that go over the normal GSM network. They will not be able to intercept, more secure forms of communication, that be Signal or that be WhatsApp. But they're able to intercept normal phone calls and or text messages. So this hardware was exported here from Luxembourg to a company in Indonesia, ultimately. The same company was able to procure previously, as confirmed by the consortium Indonesia leads, a zero-click spyware system in Indonesia. And zero-click is a kind of technical term to say it's a spyware platform like Pegasus for which no interaction is required in order to infect a smartphone. As well as several other spyware, like Kangaroo, Intellexa, Windigo, and a kind of blast from the past, for the past 15 years, Finfisher, which is a spyware company previously based out of Germany, which is now insolvent after having been sued for allegedly exporting to Turkey without a export license, as well as a spyware that we've not been able to attribute to a specific company. A bit of a conclusion there. The Indonesian authority has spent tens of millions of euros on spyware products from numerous surveillance vendors with little transparency or oversight. The full extent of sales is likely to be much higher, as we lack numbers for the total imports for several of the spyware systems that were seen active in Indonesia. It's unclear who the targets are, not a focus of this investigation. Even when we know spyware is used, it can still be difficult to find and forensically confirm cases. Amnesty International wrote to the authorities in Indonesia, including the Indonesian National Police and intelligence bodies, for comment, but did not receive responses to some of the questions that we sent, except for some threats, which is a normal thing that we see. In addition, it might be good to know that Q Cyber Technology did send a response, and there's a bit of a curious response here. where they say, as a side note, it should be mentioned that Indonesia received a general score of 57 out of 100 in Freedom House's 2023 report, and a score of 6.53 in the Economist 2023 Democracy Index. So we're talking about a country that is above average in these indexes. I think during one of the PEGA committee, there was a question from one of the parliamentarians against the General Counsel of NSO Group, where they mentioned, you know, there's been reports that you sold to Indonesia, but they score, that you sold to Saudi Arabia, which is one of the lowest scoring countries in this list. Then why did you do that? He basically didn't really have an answer. You know, 53 or 57 out of 100 is normally, at least in the Netherlands, is when you barely kind of pass an exam, so to say. If you want to read more, securitylab.amnesty.org is where you can read the full report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jurre, because we in Luxembourg we're aware that the government at the time in 2021 said Luxembourg has issued no export licenses. So you give us a little taste of how things happen irrespective of export licenses. We're going to now look at the European situation and regulation, and I'd like to introduce you to Sophie de Veld. She was a member of the European Parliament from 2004 to 2024, a member of the Liberal Group, deputy leader from 2014 to 2019, and coordinator in Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee. So protecting and advancing democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights have been her prime focus in Parliament. In 2018, she spearheaded the creation of the European Parliament Democracy, Rule of Law, Fundamental Rights Monitoring Group, and she was the chair for 6 years. She drove the Parliament initiative for its annual Rule of Law report, and she was rapporteur on transparency, data protection and migration. And of most relevance to us here, she was rapporteur for the parliamentary inquiry, PEGA, into the abuse of spyware. She's had several publications, including Naked Power in 2023, arguing for the democratic reform of the EU. Can we welcome, please, Sophie de Veld?
Maybe I'll hold it like this. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to Jurre, and I have to everybody, Amnesty International, Citizen Lab, all the journalists, the lawyers who've been doing an amazing job, an uphill battle over the last years. I'd like to start with a few general remarks. First of all, this is not going to be a very upbeat session, okay? Because the situation is grim. Usually you go into a political debate and there's a big problem, and then there's a politician who says like, we're going to fix it, and then everybody leaves all happy. That's not going to be the case today. There will be some sparks of hope at the end, but we have to realize that the situation is very serious. Second general remark, I'm sure people will have questions about the Luxembourg government or other governments. For me, frankly, it's irrelevant. All the governments of the European Union are in this together. They are collectively covering it up. They're collectively silent. In my report, I call that omerta, which is a mafia term, and I think it is actually appropriate in this context. I mean, it's all fine and dandy for the Luxembourg government to say, oh, we would never tolerate the abuse of spyware. Then somebody needs to explain to me why they are silent when other governments in the European Union are doing it, never mind governments outside the European Union. Third general remark, we tend to focus very much on the harm it does to individuals, the violation of fundamental rights. That is very important, but I think it's the wrong focus. Because a lot of people will say, like, well, it doesn't affect me. Okay, well, too bad for my neighbor, but how does it touch me? And I think people will have to start understanding that this is destroying democracy. It's not so much about the violation of somebody's privacy, but that's awful for the person concerned. But what is happening here is that those in power, political power, are using spyware to eliminate all scrutiny and all opposition. That means no more checks and balances at all. And when there are no checks and balances, then democracy is dead. Because checks and balances are the cornerstone of democracy. Yeah, okay, there's also elections, but they have elections in China and in Russia. So that doesn't make a democracy. What makes a democracy is checks and balances. The rule of law, the fact that citizens are protected against abuse from their governments. The point is that spyware allows governments to get absolute power. Because they can, not only can they spy on everyone or even manipulate what's on their devices, even the fact that you cannot be sure that they're not spying on you has a chilling effect. So they don't even have to spy on people. They can say, oh, I've got clean hands. The fact that it can be done is enough in itself. So this is one of the most dangerous weapons against democracy. And the funny thing is, everybody's getting all worked up about Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. And yes, they are huge threats to democracy as well. But this tends to be below the radar. People are not aware of it, and they think it's a very technical thing. And we're always talking about spyware, and then you have to explain how it's a technical thing. It's in your phone, and then people get this blank look because they think, okay, well, this is I don't understand. But this is about democracy, and this is also the reason why none of the EU governments, none, not a single one, none, nor the European Commission are tackling this. Because it gives them power. They love it. Even the governments which are not guilty of abuse, even the governments which are not themselves involved in the illicit exports, the mere idea that they could use it is just too tempting. They cannot resist temptation. And they're all covering for each other, all of them. And the European Commission is extremely cynical, because the European Commission keeps saying, oh, the abuse of spyware is unacceptable, intolerable, but still, this is a matter for the national authorities to tackle. The same national authorities who are actually the perpetrators. And this is also, if you wonder why there hasn't been a single conviction, not a single conviction, from the hundreds, if not thousands of cases that have been brought to light in the European Union, it's because of this. Because it's the very people that are guilty that we have to turn to for justice. That doesn't work. And even things like, the European Commission say, yeah, but spyware can only be used in individual cases, on a case-by-case basis, with judicial approval. Yeah. Okay, but if the judges are in the pockets of the government, they're part of the problem. So, and then if you have to go to that judge, and I think we're going to hear more about it, and the judge says, yeah, of course I'm going to help you, give me your phone. Well, so this is a big problem. So there's no political will, and it's even worse, because it's not just a tool that gives power to governments. It's also a very powerful currency in geopolitics and international aid. We know that the Israeli government has to issue export licenses to many of those companies have their origins in Israel. So the Israeli government has to issue export licenses, otherwise those companies cannot sell their surveillance products. So that's a very powerful tool. So now if there's a country, random hypothetical example, say Saudi Arabia, and they really want to have this stuff, and then Israel's going to say, yeah, well, difficult, because you can only buy it if we government issue an export license. But now, let's say that we have a vote in the United Nations on Gaza or on the West Bank. You could, of course, consider supporting us, and then we could consider issuing an export license. That's how cynical it is. So, and then the third element here is that these companies are earning shitloads of money. It's not just about power, it's about money. So we have governments, we have those in power, we have the entire state apparatus, and then we have, on the other hand, we have the incentive of lots and lots of money. So you can see, what we are up against is massive. And there's absolutely no incentive for not a single government, not a single spyware manufacturer or vendor to stop this arms race. So we have indeed, as European Parliament, we did the inquiry and we have adopted a resolution with a lot of findings on one hand and recommendations on the other, which have been completely ignored. That's the short summary. The European Commission just hiding behind the argument that, this is all for national authorities to investigate. But of course, the real situation here is that the European Commission is dealing the whole time with national governments, and they're not going to bother them with this kind of, with infringement proceedings. Like there was the revelation of the, what's it called, Paragon? Why is all the spyware, why do all the names start with P? Pegasus, Predator, Paragon. Okay, there's something there. Anyway, so Paragon, they found that there were at least 90 people in Italy who had been targeted with this spyware, and they were all critics of the government. Oh, what a coincidence. But then the European Commission says, yeah, but we're not going to look into this because this is for the Italian authorities to sort out. And of course, the Italian authorities are probably the ones abusing Paragon, so they're not going to do it. So why does the Commission do that? Because at the same time, the Commission wants the Meloni government, for example, to continue to give support to Ukraine, or to maybe act as a go-between with the Trump government, or there are all sorts of things that the Commission wants national governments to do. And the Commission over the last 20 years has become rather a kind of facilitator for the national governments rather than an independent institution enforcing the law. So this is a problem. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but the institutional setup of the European Union makes that there is hardly anybody who's going to act. Now, in conclusion, because I don't want you to go home all depressed, is there anything that we can hope for? Yes. First of all, I think it is very important to continue making as much noise about this as possible, keep it on the agenda, make sure it doesn't go away, and also try and communicate to people that this is something that affects them. And in a way, the current climate is favorable because people are beginning to worry about democracy again. Until not very long ago, people thought, oh yeah, democracy, it doesn't pay the rent, very abstract, I have no idea, it's a very woke, elitist thing, but people are beginning to realize that democracy does concern everybody. That's one. Secondly, keep investigating, keep bringing cases to the courts, no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult it is. And a third reason for hope is that in a peculiar way, big tech might be an ally, because companies like WhatsApp are very concerned about their reputation, because if people have the feeling that WhatsApp is the channel for spyware, people are not going to like it. So, and they're already sort of like, WhatsApp, Twitter. So, they have an interest, and this is also the reason why companies like WhatsApp have brought cases against the abuse of spyware. And then one last remark, because I know that there are a lot of people who've put a lot of hope on the so-called POMO process, which is a kind of voluntary thing. I don't want to offend anybody, but it's not going to lead anywhere. If EU governments are not willing to pass binding legislation, then the fact that they are willing to make grand statements and sign up to voluntary resolutions tells you more than enough. But there is some hope. And in any case, the last thing we should do is throw in the towel, because then they've won. And I think democracy is too important to leave it to these people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. We were so excited when Sophie and Veld agreed to come because of her direct speaking and saying exactly how things are. Now, as Sophie and Veld said, there's not been a single conviction, so now we want to go on to what happens when you have a lawsuit against NSO Group. So I would like to introduce Cèlia Carbonell. She's from Iridia, a Spanish human rights group. She's the communication officer with a background in human rights, international law and democracy. And her role is the defense of civil space. And she coordinates the social and political advocacy strategies. And she's researching and advocating for the lawsuit that Iridia have against 3 directors here in Luxembourg. So their client that they are representing, Jurre van Bergen, he's a lawyer hacked by Pegasus in 2021, targeted at the time defending several Catalan independence political leaders, some of whom were in prison. This was again zero-click technology used. Well, I think it's best to go straight over to Cèlia to hear about how can you proceed with a lawsuit against a company like NSO Group.
Thank you very much. I would like to first of all just send a huge thanks for inviting us here, but also for all the people and organizations that have been helping us and supporting us over the process, being super helpful and being a crucial part for our case to be brought into justice and to get some developments that I would explain. And I think that from our side, we are litigating on a case that of someone who was spied in 2020 during the pandemic of 19. It was discovered in 2022 when we started the case, and we are finding ourselves in 2025, and we find with a completely lack of cooperation from a Spanish state, from the companies, and even we are finding ourselves not even with just the silence and this lack of cooperation regarding of assuming some of the responsibilities and releasing information to the victims, but also with a very specific roles coming from the public prosecutor and other actors within the Spanish institutions to obstaculize these kind of investigations, because as has been said already in this table, there is a completely a lack of political will to investigate, to put things on the table, and for victims to have some reparation. And for the most important thing for us is to ensure that these things won't happen again to anyone. So, as Gilles was saying, I'm part of Iridia, which is Center for the Defense of Human Rights. We're based in Spain, and we're specialized in strategic litigation, knowing that it's a useful tool to report institutional violence, but also to end impunity of police forces and state forces. And I'm saying this because I think it's important before to go in detail to talk about the spyware and to talk about Pegasus. It's important to understand that we are, in our work, we monitor the situation of the civic space in Spain, willing to understand that the state is using different methods and tools to repress people, and spyware is one of these tools. But all of them, it aims to silence, to censorship, to repress. It creates the chilling effect on people to think it twice, to go on the streets to protest, to think it twice, to investigate on some topics. So I think it's really important to understand that it's in this context where spyware comes into play, and it's really important and it plays a really dangerous role and when it comes to picture, because it really shows how this repression is moving into a place where the state has a real connection with private companies which are really looking for profit. So as it has been said, it's a lot of money moving in between. So it's really important to understand in such cases there is these two actors. So it's the state, but it's also companies who should be held accountable. So just going deeper on the case that we are currently litigating, it goes back to the Catalan Gate. It was called the Catalan Gate. It was discovered by the Citizen Lab and Amnesty International in 2022, and it's the case of 65 people who were spied with Pegasus. It was among them, it's journalists, there is lawyers, there is human rights defenders, there is political representative from the Parliament of Catalonia, but also the European Parliament. And all of them, they were related in some way to the independentism movement in Catalonia back on the time. So there is a clear will from the state to investigate those people back on the time because of the things that were happening in Catalonia those years. Because we're speaking of 2017 to 2020, where people were spied with this spyware. It's very important to say, because I don't want to, I will focus on the company, but I would really like to stress that Spain recognized the spying on 18 of those 65. They say that 18 people were spied with a judicial authorization, but we have a problem because we have 47 people that until today they remain with no answer from the state of who spied on them, how, why, for how long. So there is like remaining with a completely silence because the state is completely denying that, even though we have forensic evidence that is a correlation between the way that the different phones were spied. So the author should be the same. So the case that we litigate is the case of a lawyer. It's a lawyer who was representing some of the political figures in Catalonia. Some of them, they were in prison at the time. So it's very important because I think it's really easy to, it doesn't need to be said more than that like he was spied in May 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. So he was working as a lawyer using online means, so meeting and also having contact with his clients back on the time through his phone and his laptop. And the day that he was spied, he was having a strategic meeting with other lawyers who were also having other lawyers related to a same case. So that day was the day that he was spied. In his case, is one of this person that was spied without a judicial authorization. So we are talking about illegal surveillance, unauthorized out surveillance, because none a judge sign or accept that surveillance. So it's very important to say. And I said he was spied with this kind of technique, which is a Pegasus 2, as some experts refer to. That is a zero click. So he did not realize that he was spied because they did not need the interaction of his devices. So at that time, then they have access to all his information. But it's really important to stress that it's just not his information, but everyone who has a contact with him back on the time. So that means his family, his friends, his colleagues, his clients. So we're talking that this kind of surveillance really affects several rights at the same time. So we talk about the right to privacy, we talk about the freedom of expression, assembly, we're talking about also in his case the right to defense, for justice, for effective remedies. So it's very important to say that when a state decides to spy on a lawyer, it's a decision that really attacks the real basic, like the base of the rule of law and democracy, because lawyers are a protective figure that should be protected, and it kind of represents this sense of democracy and rule of law. So we say when Spain decides to spy on lawyers, they're completely breaking down such systems. But it's really important that when what we're getting that is, it's a national security issue that should be tackled as that, then we say no, it's an European issue because we're having a breach of the rule of law. It's really citizens, but journalists, lawyers are not protected, are attacked, and then they're finding themselves isolated in front of courts and trying to justify themselves without evidence, because it's really complicated that even courts accept the evidence that has been already produced by Amnesty International, the Citizen Lab. So I think it's very important to put that on the table and realize how many obstacles we're finding ourselves, and how even today there is more questions than answers, because we don't even know the extent of this operation of surveillance. So until today, we have someone who was affected by that does not know anything about it, because all the questions that we have been bringing up, they have been denied, that's a secret, it's classified, you cannot access to that, and we have been trying to ask the companies, and there's a completely lack of response. So I think it's really important to really try to say that how the person and how the organization that we're working to really ensure that this does not happen again. We're finding in the place that it's us and our persistence to really investigate, to really put in data, to show evidence, and really show and break down their narrative and their silence, because I think that we're finding in a place that is even like more evidence that this is a global problem. It's happening all around the world, and we try to address it as that, because it's nothing that is happening in Spain and we want to fix it. No, we're really taking a case and litigating on a case to have a collective answer that could be helpful for others, because now it was just dismantled the case in Serbia. So we are in contact with people in Serbia, trying to help them in order to build up their strategy, their legal strategy. So in order to say that after all these years and after the Pega Committee, we have been able to meet organizations in Poland, in Hungary, in Greece, that they were the states like highlighted in the report, that they were investigated, and it was proven that it was an abuse of spyware. So we created a space to share strategies, to talk, to really explain ourselves, what are we finding the obstacles, in order to pursue together aiming for justice. And I think that it's the best answer that we're giving to them, while what we're finding is just silence and also the continual denial of this. But it's really important because without forgetting that the responsibility of Spain in this case, we decided to also to start investigating the other part, that is something that we are not used as a Center for the Defense of Human Rights. And it was really investigating who is the company behind this surveillance. Who are they? Where are they from? How they work? So then we start investigating on NSO, which is a company that started in 2010 in Israel. And it's really interesting because when NSO it creates by 2010, they're even saying that we are creating a spyware that gives an answer to European needs. And we want to create something that is completely impossible to detect. So this is the first label that we have to realize that, we are grateful that Amnesty Tech and Citizen Lab were finding the ways to find the vulnerabilities, but now, which kind of spyware they're using against us, knowing that the will to find something that could be impossible to detect, it was at the really beginning on how this and when these kind of programs were built. So we start looking into the company, realizing that it started in 2010, but then very quickly it was expanded all around the world. And surprise, the high presence of the company, it's in Luxembourg. and it has many companies related to NSO group that they do the same kind of business. So actually they are just exporting license of cybersecurity products. So it's kind of a synonym of Pegasus, that could be. So that's why also with this lack of cooperation and also even we tried to send a petition for information in Israel that was found with no information. We decided to put the focus on the companies in Luxembourg, those that are related and also do this kind of the same business as NSO in Israel, knowing that it has been proven also for the PEGA committee that this Luxembourg is a business hub for this company to operate. And because of the lack of transparency of the companies, we don't know which kind of business or which kind of responsibility they have. But it's very important to raise them and to put them on the table and ask for responsibilities, because they're, in terms of decision making, they're also involved in this violation of human rights that we are identifying and trying to pursue for justice. So then, so I think that it's really important to highlight the role of the companies in this, and as has been said already, we have been, we decided to go a step further. So like we have these companies in Luxembourg that should be investigated, but these companies has people who are responsible for their acts. So that's why, as Iridia, we try to ask for the inclusion as a defendants on our case of 3 board of directors of these companies, because we were able, thanks to an investigation that we conduct, to realize that the people who are managing the companies in Israel and the people that managing the companies in Luxembourg are the same. So there is kind of an evident relation between companies. So for us, it's like they're the same people doing the same thing. And these companies in Luxembourg are the door open for the NSO group to operate in Europe, because it has been proven in some cases. So that's why we pursued to identify these people and to really ask to be investigated in our case, to be held accountable, because we didn't find with any kind of accountability since the really beginning. So even though in the beginning the judge decided to dismiss our petition to include these 3 people, who are like Shalef Julio, Henri Lavie, and Yuval Sommer. 2 of them are the 2 founders of the NSO group back in 2010. We found with an appeal that we present that the Court of Appealing decided to accept the petition. So we're finding that for first time we have an indictment of these 3 board of directors that are based and are part of the companies in Luxembourg are investigated in a criminal procedure in Spain. So, and it's very important because it's the first time that we have a case that the investigation is going, it's moving forward. And it's the first time, it's really silly, but it's like after 3 years of a case that has been ongoing, these people are going to be notified for the first time that they are included and they are investigated in a criminal case in Spain. So I think that it's a very important moment for like Spyware all around Europe and for the investigation on this. But at the same time, it's the time for being here in Luxembourg and raise the voice and say like, look, there is companies here next, as Jill was saying, in the other street, that they are accused and they are being investigated on a criminal procedure. So authorities in Luxembourg should take a step forward. It should also take some measures and consequences. So, and I know that it has been I'm conducting many work here, but I think that it's very important to say that. I think that I have opportunity to keep going on. Thank you very much.
I know it's difficult for Cèlia because she has so much to share with us, but if we could move now onto the panel part of the discussion, so maybe I'll limit it to 2 questions, as we started late. But I would, so I'd like to welcome and introduce Jean-Louis Zayen from Luxembourg. So he's the co-coordinator of the Initiative pour un devoir de vigilance, which is a civil society coalition here in Luxembourg, advocating for stronger corporate accountability laws, particularly in relation to human rights, environmental protection, and corporate due diligence. And they are pushing for Luxembourg to go beyond any minimum EU requirements for due diligence on laws for human rights in the supply chain. So they want more accountability for industries with human rights and environmental high risks, which includes cybersecurity. So maybe if I could combine a bit the questions, and I'll start with Jean-Louis, but then after, if any of the other panelists would like to comment too. So we see that spyware knows no borders and the regulation is absent. So there's two parts to a question. Like, one is, how must states protect people? And another aspect of the question is, why does Luxembourg allow NSO entities on its territories?
Thank you, G. So I would like to highlight first some remarks of my neighbor also. When Sophie spoke about voluntary measures, I think we have definitely the evidence since decades that voluntary measures are not the way to address corporate malpractice and violations of human rights. And the only means a government has today, and Jill said it in her introduction, is to send a letter. That's all. Minister Asselborn wrote 2021 a letter to 9 companies based here in Luxembourg, affiliated to the NSO group. And this shows clearly the current limits with which the ministry can act in the event of economic activities by Luxembourg companies that risk violating human rights. So EU Commission says this is national resort, and national resort means nothing beside the letter. So you see, and he did this for a few times to other companies active in Palestine, which were on the list of the High Commissioner of United Nations. Consequences, the same with NSO, 0. So I think what we need is definitely, and which is an important tool, is legislation. And here in Luxembourg we are fighting since 6 years, 15 organizations of civil society, for holding companies accountable for human rights harm connected to corporate malpractice, and to prevent human rights abuses, and to make an end to impunity of companies. So, and this would be also an answer, giving access to victims of corporate malpractices, including NSO, here in Luxembourg, in jurisdiction, in justice. And this is extremely important when we have to face such companies. And we definitely need, and that's the reason why we are pushing for a broader, a stronger legislation on national level with an approach of high-risk sector. And we are, it's very clear. NSO is operating in a high-risk sector of human rights. Of course, it's evident for everybody here in this room. But under the so-called Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, only companies with more than 1,000 employees and a turnover of 450 million euro will be under the scope of this legislation. So NSO has only 600 to 800 employees and which a lower turnover. So that's why we ask to integrate in legislation the concept of a high-risk sector in order to give responsibility also to such companies. But I have to tell you also there is actually a strong backlash on the level of the European Commission initiated, and this backlash had a name, Omnibus. A big EU deregulation, revising key corporate sustainability laws, voted, but not even entered into force. So this will make it extremely difficult to go beyond the directive, which is actually under pressure by multinationals and business associations, but nevertheless, we keep our request on this. We have to have access for victims to the court. We have to have responsibility, accountability for companies also here in Luxembourg. That's my response. Sophie.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to add something to that, because it's not that I disagree. I just don't think it's going to solve the problem. Because I think in most cases, what these spyware vendors are doing is probably legal. The real problem is in the use of spyware and the trade in spyware, and that is done by governments, by public authorities. That's the problem. Because even if you have, you know, the legal remedy and the right to a trial for the targets, you know, how are they going? It's like what Cèlia said. How are they going to litigate if they don't get access to their files by the people who've spied on them? That's the problem. If the state is spying on you, and you want to take the state to court, there's a little point in taking the company to court. You want to take the state to court because they've been the ones spying on you. But the state is also the one holding your files and not giving you access. That's the problem. So what we called for in the European Parliament was actually many legislative initiatives binding the governments and the public authorities. And I think one key step that has to be taken is to have a legal definition of national security. Because national security is used by governments to justify all their acts, anything. You know, in Dutch we have an expression, you have these multi-purpose cloths that you use in the kitchen for everything. You can use it to wipe everything clean. And that has to change. I mean, in the Netherlands, to give you another example, you know, national security covers a lot of different agencies, including the agency responsible for road salt in winter. It's a matter of national security. So that would justify spying on a journalist. You know, so it's ridiculous. We need a legal demarcation of what national security is. And secondly, we need very strict rules for the use of spyware, because I'm theoretically, I'm not opposed to the use of spyware to fight very serious crimes. But if the list that the Parliament, the rules that the European Parliament has called for, if they were to be adopted, then the cases in which spyware could be used are so incredibly exceptional that, you know, we're going to wipe out the entire market for spyware. And the rules would be very strict. So we need rules regulating the governments. Because we have a lot of rules for the companies, and there might be more. We've called for a few more rules, but they are not actually the main problem. The problem are the governments, because they are the clients. There's a second remark, something that came to mind when I was listening to Cèlia. Very often we think that spyware is being used to spy on people in real time. The problem, the difference with spyware and traditional spying, phone taps and you know, spies following you around in the streets, is that spyware gives access to your entire life retroactively. And that is also why judicial authorization is not effective. Because normally if you're the police and you want to spy on someone for a period of 3 months, you know, you put a phone tap and you get judicial authorization for 3 months. The problem here is that if a judge authorizes the use of spyware, it's not for a set period. It's for everything that you've been doing ever since, well, we invented, you know, online activity, electricity, basically. So it's much more, and this is also why we need to regulate the use of spyware. And yes, we also have to, of course, have much better oversight of what the companies are doing. But for example, NSO, when we asked them, yeah, but you're selling spyware to Hungary and Poland, the previous Polish government, and they are using it for human rights abuses. And then they answered, and you know, we couldn't say anything. They said, well, you know, they're members of the European Union, so they're bound by the same standards. Besides, you know, we know that there are concerns about the governments of Poland and Hungary, but you're not doing anything about it. So why should we? See, so that is where the problem lies.
Just to add, and because I think I agree very much what has been said, and it's also like what we're getting from the judge is like, no, but because it sounds very abstract and absurd at so way, because when we were trying to say, look at the companies, the judge is saying, no, but it's the state. I say, okay, then investigate the state, because we have a problem that it seems that because it's states who are using these tools in abusive and disproportionate manner, it's covered by legality, and it's not. So we have to question that, because we have a problem even in the law in Spain, that it's really abstract. So it really allows this kind of tools to be used with a judicial authorization. In our case, we don't have the judicial authorization, so it's a legal surveillance. But in other cases that has been a judicial authorization, it's included in the law, but it's not a way to follow up on during and after, so the person is not get notified. So if someone not discover that's remain in the past. So I think it's very important that to tackle that. But we ask ourselves what is national security, because in Spain we don't know it. It's everything. It's a way to cover things, because then if it's a national security issue, then it's covered by the official Secret Act, which was signed by Franco in Spain, that it remains until today. And it's completely classified all the information that could be issued in that matter. So I think it's very important to say that we have to be aware that it's a potential market that is growing up very fast. But at the same time, there had been some steps taken. For example, it was filed on December like a report for the Venice Commission that is trying to draft some minimum safeguards on the use of spyware. It's just like saying this: we need to regulate. We know how states are abusing their power on citizens, and it creates a real threat on citizens. So it's very important to tackle that. But then when you go through the different safeguards that it has been established in this report, Pegasus does not, it's not complying with none of it. So it's a way to say, okay, let's establish these safeguards, and then let's see how these specific programs, because of how abusive they are and how much access to the content of phones and the way that they work, they should be banned, because there is not a possible way to be used in line with human rights because of how they have been built. So I think it's very important to be said that these steps that have been taken, it should be, we have to keep going, moving forward, really understanding that this technology is growing up. And it's potentially, it's like many companies. Now we know that it's European companies who are developing these programs, these kind of technologies to be used in other countries. So it's getting worse and worse, and it's remaining unregulated. So we are finding in this situation that if we don't take a step now, I mean, we don't know how we're going to be, no, in few years.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't think that we should be focusing on the technology itself, because you ban one product and something else is going to pop up. It's all about how it's being used. And I mean, you gave the example of the 65, 18 of which were, let's say, legal. But there is a snag, because it was legal in the sense that the correct procedures have been followed. But was it also legal from the point of view that it was proportionate and justified? And the problem is, we don't know, because those 18 people don't get access to their files, because that's classified because it's national security, see? So, it's, again, I don't think, yes, I think those companies are evil. Yes, I think they have probably broken a couple of laws, but all in all, I don't think our biggest challenge is regulating that. We have to regulate it, and it's also in the report of Parliament. But the real problem is with the governments. And again, you ask, why is Luxembourg host to, why does Luxembourg tolerate that they're doing their banking business here? I have to say, I'm not even sure what legal means Luxembourg would have. But okay, they could ask more questions. But the question is, okay, so they do their banking in Luxembourg. Companies may have their headquarters in Ireland and they get a favorable tax treatment. They set up kind of early companies in the Netherlands because it's so easy to do business with the government there. They are producing and selling the stuff in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Hungary, in Greece, and also some neighboring countries. They have, these companies like Intellexa has privileged relations with the Greek government, and on and on and on and on. The problem is, even if the Luxembourg government says, and I know Mr. Asselborn, and I'm sure he means well, but if he says, we're not going to tolerate this, then I would like to ask, why has the Luxembourg government, the Prime Minister or the responsible ministers, why haven't they raised this issue in the Council, in the European Union? Why haven't they cooperated with the inquiry of the European Parliament? Not a single member state has cooperated. Yeah, okay, some have sent us some material that was completely irrelevant, pretending they were cooperating, but there weren't, not a single one. And I repeat the term that we've been using, omerta. This is what the mafia does. It's a pact of silence. And that is the problem. We can call for legislation all we like, but if the political will is not there, and politicians are only going to start moving if people get angry, that's when they will start moving. And I mean, for the time being, we're not going to find 100,000 people taking to the streets because of spyware, because most people don't even know what it is. But as I said, the time is right to sensibilize people around the topic of democracy, and that's why I think it is also in the narrative, in the communication, it is very important to underline that this is a huge, massive threat to democracy. It's not just about the individual victims, it's about democracy, and that concerns us all.
I fully agree with what you are saying, because it's not only about spyware, but also the names have been already said, Musk, Zuckerberg. But when I see what is going on at the actual EU Commission, we see very clear what is going on. Multinationals, 70% of their demand for watering down the CSDD is in the new proposal of the Commission. So with this Commission and with this political situation here in Europe, it will be extremely difficult, but I agree with you that this could be the way if people, let's say, get angry and go to street. But I fully agree also with the definition of national security, what you said before. And I would like to remind also one thing about the guiding principles of United Nations on business and human rights. First, the first pillar is the state has the obligation to assure respect of human rights of its citizens. So we are talking about this. And there is a violation. And secondly, companies have also to respect human rights. So I think we have to discuss on these two pillars, not excluding one and not the other one. So I think both are extremely important. And why do we have, this was the second part of the question of Gilles before, why do we have these companies here in Luxembourg? It's very clear. Since 1929, we have here in Luxembourg the holdings. It's one of 40,000 holdings. These 9 companies, part of NSO, are holdings. We had to abolish, because of the European Commission and legislation, the concept of holdings, but Luxembourg did it, and now we name it Société de Participation Financière, which is at the end the same. So it's about holdings we have here. You said it before, serves to avoid taxes, clearly, but also brings millions of money to the Luxembourgish state. At the same time, from these 40,000 sub-parties we have actually here. And not all are only letterboxes, to make it very clear. There are operational centers also here in Luxembourg of a certain number of so-called sub-parties. So this is for me one of the reasons. This brings money, very clear. We are not the only ones. We know that in the Netherlands, for instance, there is also a similar concept, and also in other European Union states. Again, this is to bring money to the national budget. As simple as this.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I have the feeling that you're absolving a little bit the governments and the states. It is all about those corporations. They're providing the tools. For them, the business is not human rights violations. They're selling stuff to European governments. And I would like to say this is also, it's not a party political thing, because you say this commission is treating businesses kindly. Well, let's not forget, they're all in it. Socialists, Greens, Liberals, Christian Democrats, all of them. And over the last years, ever since summer 2021, since the Pegasus scandal broke, none of the governments has cooperated. Well, there were Greens in government in Germany, in Austria, in Sweden, so the whole idea, and socialists as well. So the whole idea that this is a party political thing and there's sort of a nasty, right-wing, corporate-friendly kind of, no, all of them are collectively responsible. And if EU governments would collectively stop buying this shit and exporting it to the rest of the world, then those businesses are dead. So you can regulate all you like, but that's not going to solve the issue. As long as there are clients. So this is not about, because I'm all in, everything you say about the lack of transparency in the holdings. I entirely agree. The point is that if we focus our efforts on that, we're not going to solve the problem. The root of the problem is power. Governments who use spyware to assert their power. They eliminate scrutiny and opposition. That is the real problem. And if they would no longer be allowed to use the stuff, or only in very, 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 very exceptional hypothetical cases, then the problem is solved. And then those companies will cease to exist, because they have no business anymore. That's the problem. But because there is no, the companies are not going to kill their own business. They will say, look, we're just selling a product, and in in the the conditions of the contract that says that they cannot be used, the product cannot be used for human rights violations. So hey, we're not responsible. And then it's the governments who say, we cannot disclose anything because this is all national security. So and so I think the real root cause here is governments, and we need to tackle them.
I agree with a lot of what has been said here. I think there's one important point to make, is that we are discussing the same thing for the past 15 years. This is not something new since the Pegasus scandal that we broke in 2021. Previously we've seen both Hacking Team and the Finfishes of this world in Europe, exporting, violating embargo rights to a number of countries in the world. So this is a 15-year-old problem that we're discussing, and they do get licenses. And the other problem is that it might be slightly harder here in Luxembourg. It's just the money goes here, but there's no dual-use items, as far as we know, being exported from here. That apparently is being done from Israel.
There are exportation of dual use, of course there are here.
But even if
Because this is also where the Commission comes in. The dual use. Of course, if you're exporting this stuff to Saudi Arabia or Madagascar, or I can't remember the full list of countries that the stuff is being, Sudan, it was being exported from Cyprus and Greece to Sudan. Of course that's illegal. We have rules in place. It's not as if we start from scratch. The problem is that there are European governments, in this case the Greek and the Cypriot government, who are issuing licenses. And in the cases where it's been exported illegally, it almost reads like a movie script, with planes flying with USB sticks and God knows what to say. In those cases, the national authorities knew what was happening. They knew what was happening, and they didn't intervene. So then we asked the European Commission, because this is all violation of the European dual-use regulation. So it's completely illegal what's happening. It's already in breach of the law. And then the Commission goes like, oh, we have absolutely no powers to enforce the law. Okay, then my question to the Commissioner was, so, what's your job all about then? Go home. Yeah, it's your main task to enforce the law, and they don't. But this is the problem. We have laws. We have a lot of laws in place, and the abuse of spyware and the exports of spyware are, in most cases, already regulated. But the laws are not being enforced.
Yeah, not sufficient.
I think also the other part, and I agree with a lot of what has been said, but just killing the companies here in Europe is what we've seen, is that they just simply move away to, places like Singapore or the UAE, where they operate from. I think especially now in Spain, where a bunch of companies are being set up every month that are spyware companies or enablers of spyware companies in Europe. We don't often see the enablers of a lot of the spyware companies. So, we rally against the spyware companies, but who are all the enablers that are, make sense of a lot of their pieces. I think the other thing is that Amnesty would still like to call for a global moratorium on the spyware sales and transfers until there's compliance with human rights. A lot of the public dual-use licenses that are being issued, it would be great if we can finally search them in a searchable database and hold companies to account. And the other problem that we kind of see is that, in Spain, Beraston was one such company that worked for ultimately the UAE state agencies. They died, and 2 more companies spawned from that. So we're playing whack-a-mole kind of in the last 15 years. As for what people could do, I think we should definitely put pressure and send letters to some of the public prosecutors in some of the countries where we are all from, to investigate these companies and open cases. There might actually have been dual-use exports from Luxembourg, and it would be great if this could be confirmed in an independent investigation.
Can I say something?
the thing with the licenses, which have been issued clearly in violation of the rules, when we asked the European Commission to enforce, they said, well, we can only act if somebody files a complaint. Like business law, but who's going to file a complaint? Nobody. So that's the problem, and the states themselves are not going to do it, and most of the prosecutors of the countries which are the worst offenders are in the pockets of the governments. So like in Greece that's the case, in Cyprus that's the case. Well, Hungary not even bother to talk about it. Poland. I'm not going to say anything about Spain. You know better, but this is. This is the problem, and they're not, and that may be, I mean, prosecutors in Luxembourg will be independent, and in the Netherlands and in other countries, but if those governments are silent about the wrongdoing of their peers, then nothing will move.
Is it okay to open questions? Would anyone like to ask a question?
Thanks a lot. First, a question to Jurre. How can a citizen check that his smartphone has such a spyware, and then if he detects it has, to whom should he make announcement? Is there a help group or something?
Thank you. It was very interesting. I tried to get the whole picture. So Pegasus actually was developed in Israel and commercialized by Israel. Israel is a state that since 55 to 60 years is an occupying power, a violent occupying power, and it's a very high degree of surveillance, especially of the Palestinian people. I mean, something like the wall is full of electronics. There is facial recognition in Gaza and everywhere in the West Bank. I remember that magazine 972 said at the beginning of this genocide, we agree about that, happening in Gaza, they said that the military is choosing the targets by digital means. So actually it's an artificial intelligence that is choosing where to bomb, and I suppose that tools like spyware were used by the Mossad before, I suppose, and by the Israel military. So I wonder why at one point they started to commercialize this, it's very interesting what you said, that there needs to be a license from the Israeli state to sell it to other countries. So this gives an enormous power to the state of Israel, and maybe it was astonishing when this terrible war in Gaza now started, that the European countries, they all gave like green light. The Commission, Ursula von der Leyen went there, and it was like they really felt, I mean, the Israeli military felt like everything is allowed now to them, whatever horrible violations of human rights. So I try to get the whole picture.
Yeah, so to answer your question, we as the Security Lab within Amnesty, if you go to securitylab.amnesty.org, we have a get help banner on our website. If you fill out the form, we assess it and then we'll either help you or point you to other groups like Citizen Lab or Access Now that could assist in this. Ultimately, you should decide for yourself whether you want to go public or not. That's not something that we can do for you. You yourself will want to maybe you have other things that you may want to weigh whether you want to go public or not. But that's, we could assist in weighing this, I think. Whether, ultimately a lot of these techniques come forward from the 80 to 100 groups of the Israeli military. Ultimately, I think, these people go to a lot of these groups together, and ultimately, they find a way to maybe commercialize it and make a buck on the side. And ultimately, I think next to it is given it was kind of zero click, so there was no interaction needed. It was something that hasn't really been done before by a lot of the spyware companies out there. And so they had an edge, and they could, the Israeli state could use this in kind of like cyber diplomacy, where they could either gain votes in the UN or start having normalization relations between Israel and states like Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and a bunch of other non-Muslim states. So I think all of these things together over time probably had to do with that.
Well, as to the first question, the European Parliament has been calling repeatedly for the creation of a kind of European help desk where citizens can go, because we cannot, we've been relying on Amnesty and Citizen Lab for years now, but that's not doable. I think, however, for the time being, spyware is still fairly expensive. Will probably get cheaper, but and they're not going to use it on every single citizen. It's always going to be critical journalists or corruption hunters or opposition politicians, so that they are going to be the ones most targeted. But every citizen should have the right to or a place to go to. But again, it was on this long list of demands of the European Parliament, which has not been answered. With regard to Israel, yes, it's being used on the Palestinians. I know that. And nobody's going to complain about that. The Palestinians, but nobody listens. So nobody, and certainly not any, any Israeli authorities are going to raise objections. There was one scandal where they found that the Israeli police had been using it against Israeli citizens, and that's when they all got very upset. But that was it. Now, those companies are not officially state companies. Officially, they are commercial entities, and they need a marketing and export license from the Israeli government. But all of them, without exception, are former officials from the army or the Mossad. All of them. So, it's all, they all know each other. And yes, for Israel, it's, they've been using it as a, how do you say that? Cyber diplomacy. That still sounds fairly nice. But basically as political currency for deals, also dirty deals. But what you also see is that they used to issue these licenses to basically everybody. Those companies, the cyber manufacturers, or the spyware manufacturers would get licenses to sell it to any country in the world, and human rights were just not an issue. Until they found that there were some US citizens who had been targeted by accident. In many cases, US citizens with dual nationality. And then, of course, the US got upset. And then things changed. Because when the US get upset, then Israel is listening. So then they suddenly reduced the list of countries that they issued licenses for from 105 down to 37 or something like this. So all of a sudden they woke up, and all of a sudden they became very conscious of this clause that they can only issue a license for countries which are not violating human rights. So, but yeah, it's a very dirty game. And the point is also that you see these Israeli developers and vendors of spyware. They're all over Europe. Many of them would actually also have dual nationality. There are lots of them in Intellexa who would have French-Israeli nationality, I believe, and then they were living in first in Hungary and then in Greece, and also the Israeli government and European governments were also having exchanges the whole time. So it's always part of a package. You know, the Polish government and Hungarian government, they visited Israel just before they bought the stuff, and then the licenses are issued. It's all part of so again, that's why I'm saying, if you really want to eliminate the problem, tackle the governments, make sure there's proper oversight, and we should also be a lot tougher inside the European Union. I mean, if we feel there are countries that are governed by governments who do not respect the rule of law, then we should have our own blacklist. You know, how can you on the one hand say, well, we have countries against which we have Article 7, but we're still doing business with them, and they can buy all the spyware they like. You know, we have to be inside the European Union, and here it's not just Poland and Hungary, because we tend to be distracted by them. It's also Luxembourg facilitating, Ireland facilitating, the Netherlands facilitating. The Greek government is really one of the worst offenders in the entire European Union, but France is also an interesting case, because France has, here, if I may, little anecdote. So there was a company called Amnesty, I think it was called, that was accused many years ago of selling surveillance material to, I believe, Egypt and Libya and some other model democracies. And then, so somebody took them to court, and they were accused of human rights violations, and that's been sitting in the courts for many years, since 2011, 2012, thereabouts. Okay, so this was bad publicity for the company, so they did badly, and then they were bought by another company, and then that was bought by another company, and that was bought by Atos. Now, who was the previous boss of Atos? Somebody called Thierry Breton. Thierry Breton, who then became a member of the European Commission. You know, so it's all, and the French government were, they were still issuing licenses, and the same people who were part of that whole scheme, if you want, they're all in high places. Some of them may be judges, some of them are running ministries. So, so nobody's looking at France. Everybody goes like, oh, Hungary, Poland, Luxembourg, but they're a major exporter of the stuff. And ultimately, the company we're talking about is now part of the Intellexa consortium. So, they're all in it, all of them.
Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for our panelists. Like, I feel we could go on and on, but can we say a big thank you for the panelists?
Well, thank you all. Thank you, the panelists, for this very insightful discussion, and thank you all for joining us. I just wanted to remind you for this petition is a joint action that Amnesty International here in Luxembourg is doing, which calls for a ban on the sale and the use of this software until there are international regulations. So feel free to sign it. So far, these 2 days during the festival, there have been a lot of people signing it. So why not? You can join us in this action as well. As well as, I want to thank 3 of our translators who did a great job. Yes, they did a great job in translating this very intensive discussion. So it was great having you here, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.